Hey guys, and welcome to the third part of the React JS course for beginners. In this video, we will understand everything about components. So let's get started. Previously, we learned everything that focused and explained us all the structure and how does the React JS code works. Now, we will dive into the components. So I've been always focusing about something called as components in React JS, but we never really dug into it. All we know is now is basically it's a function and it returns some HTML code. So let's try to understand of component as something like as a template. So what we do in a template is we have the structure, and based on a template we can update or change data in it. So the same thing is a React component. So let's try to think of this VS Code editor as a template. So the template of that we are focusing is this file structure. So this file structure is basically a template that has a header, and within that it has all the directories, and if we open the directories we can see again directories, and likewise we can also see files in the directories. So this structure is always going to remain the same irrespective of any file that we open. The same thing we can replicate using these functions or these components in React.js. So now you're going to ask me, this component was obviously built and written when we ran the npx create react app. How do we create our own components, right? That's the first question that rises to your head. So don't worry, I'll show you how we're going to do that. So first things first, we can obviously render certain data inside our components. So let's see how to do that. So we create this function app, and we can go inside that and we can create something called as a const my data, and let's give it some data. Like for the timing, I'll give my name Carl inside this data. Now there's nothing really happening here, but instead of now putting this hello world, I can also render my data. Now that I do it is using these curly braces. I open close curly braces, and inside that I'll simply put the name of my variable. As you can see, the IntelliSense is giving me the recommendation. So I click on that, save my file, go on my website, and it says hello world Carl. But again, this doesn't really explain the reason as to why do we use this data, because this is not the best use case. But again, we understand how to display certain data. Now, what we can do is we can create a component. So now these components, what could be this component? How can we use this component? So let's try to create a user account, user tile, okay? A user tile that is storing and displaying data of different users. So now you will create a single user tile component and call that component every time you want to display some user information. You will not every time keep on creating the same tile again and again. That's not the best ideal scenario. You will create it once, and every time you want to use it, you will make calls of that tile, right? You will make calls of that component. So that's what you're going to do here. So to create a component, you can obviously use this function, but as you start working with React.js, you will learn that React.js always makes use of the ES6, that is the new methodologies of creating code in JavaScript. So let's go with that and create a arrow function that is goes by the following syntax: const, and we are obviously making a user tile. So let's name it as a user tile, and this is the name of my component. And if you're not aware of an arrow function, it's basically a function with a different kind of syntax that follows this way. And within this section of the arrow, you can place your arguments, but currently we do not have any arguments, so we can just leave it blank. Now what I'm going to do is I am pretty much going to return certain data. You've seen here we are obviously returning something, right? And you always need to return data inside a single div. You cannot return something like, let's say I want to return h1 and the name of the user Carl. So you can do this, and now we have successfully created our tile. Okay, so this goes to by the name of user tile. Now we need to obviously render it on our web page. So inside the application, I will use this syntax, something familiar with HTML tags: user tile slash close. So you open your arrow, and you type in your name of your component, put slash and close it. It's as simple as this. So doesn't it look really familiar like HTML code? Yes, it does look like HTML code, but it is absolutely has no connection to HTML code. It's basically a JavaScript component. Let me save this file. And as you can see here, we have returned and rendered successfully our first component in React.js. Doesn't that sound really cool? So basically, the first component, the main component is this whole app present within a window. And inside that, we have created our own component that simply displays this information call. Now, we can keep rendering these tiles, okay? So let me copy, paste, something like this. And now on the screen, you'll have 3 calls. Now, it is not the best practice to create a component inside a file, because tomorrow you will be working with tens and hundreds of components and managing them isn't the best really option right here. So if you watch the previous video, you will remember that what React.js did is, the developers of React.js, they created this app.js and they called that component inside index.js. So we are going to be smart and replicate this same thing. So what we're going to do is, inside our src, we are going to create a new file. And always remember, when you're creating components, the first letter of your file name should be always capital. So let's follow that rule, user file.js. And now we have created a user file.js. And first thing is, I'm obviously going to import React. It's not really important, but I like to do that. Import React. Okay. Now I can simply be a bit lazy. Obviously programmers are lazy, so I'm just going to cut that code and paste it here. And I'm going to write here export default and the user type. So basically we want to export this function, or I like to call it a component now. So I want to export this component, right? So I'm just saying export default user type, save this. Now, if I try to run this, obviously what you're going to think is the same thing, that this is giving an error. How is this really possible? Because I have created a user tile. I'm sorry, I named it as user file. That apologies goes to that. And let me just change it back to user tile, save it. So I've created this user tile function. Okay, let me just show you again. The error is still coming. And I've also called the function, the component here. But why is it still giving error? Obviously, I haven't imported it. So you need to import it. User tile, enter, save it, and voila. We've got no errors down here, and our web page is again working perfectly and is basically displaying data card. Now, certain things that you need to be aware of while working in components. I just previously mentioned that you cannot return many HTML tags inside a single component. So what I was trying to refer is, like I have now mentioned here h1 call, and I want to again return more data inside the tag. So I can't do something like this, like call and maybe age 20. This isn't going to work. As you can see, it's giving these red errors. And let's save it and see. As you can see, it says module build failed. You need to use a JSX fragment. Okay. So JSX again is JavaScript XML elements, something same that we are working currently with components. So you can think of it as components. It's not exactly the same meaning, but for the timing, just think it's a component. We will look into it in the further videos. So what it's saying is, adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped inside a single tag. So that's what they're trying to say is, you cannot return many elements. You need to wrap it. So again, to wrap it, it's pretty simple. You can just use something called as a div tag, which you've obviously learned in, I'm thinking you've learned in HTML. Save it, and now it works perfectly. So basically, within this div tag, we have got this two elements, h1 call and h2 age 20. Again, we can also use something called as fragments, which is only available in JavaScript while working in React, not in HTML. Basically, you just use these opening closing arrows in the start and in the end and save it, and it pretty much does the same. We'll learn ahead what is the advantages of using these fragments instead of div. So I think this explains a lot about building components and understanding of how a components work in React.js. In the further videos, we are going to learn about something called as props and why it is useful while working in React components. So if you like this video and are waiting for more videos like these, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the Hackinon's YouTube channel and share it with your friends. We'll be back soon with more fun and interesting videos.